Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Catalyst Storieroad Seminar Series. My name is Philip Gilpin Jr. I am the CEO and Executive Director of Catalyst. And I am going to be handing it off in a minute to our host for the day, Elaines Story, who will introduce our guests. Just one note for everybody out there watching live. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please use the comment section to post your questions, and I'll be working behind the scenes throughout the seminar to get those answered for you. And at this time, I'd like to hand it over to our host for the hour, Miss Elaines Story.
Thank you, Philip. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to make a quick introduction of our guests. Their full bios are in our posts on Facebook, so make sure you take a look at that. We have Cort, who's the Vice President of Drama Development at ABC Studios. Elaine Lowe, a writer who worked for HBO Max and just announced today that she'll be working for the CW on Dynasty. And Steve Basilone, a writer-producer who worked on Community, Happy Endings, and is currently working on Indebted with Dan Levy. Mm-hmm. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Hello.
Hi, gang.
I have a very ambitious itinerary today, so let's just dive right in. Our first topic of the day is the origin of the idea, from the writer's head to the executive's desk. So, Cort, could you walk us through the development process? How do you accept pitches? Who gets to walk through the door and talk with you? Start us off with that.
Sure. That's an incredibly broad question. So I'm going to take up the next 7 hours of your time.
Yeah.
Spreadsheets. It's going to get really boring.
Okay.
I'm trying to think how
Kurt.
yeah, give you the sort of concise answer. But look, I think that, in broad strokes, the development process looks like probably what many people tuned in already know, which is a writer comes up with a fantastic idea, and through some sort of gatekeeper, whether it's their agent or a non-writing producer that a studio or network already has a deal with, will come in and talk to knuckleheads like myself, and we'll give the sort of thumbs up or thumbs down, and then it's sort of off to the races. And again, I don't want to sort of bore everybody with all the details, but there's steps to each of the process. Once it's set up once an idea is set up at a network, you commission a pilot script, and then within that pilot script there are stages. So you start with the story area document that sort of briefly outlines what the pilot story is going to be. Then you're off to the outline, which is a slightly more detailed version of that. And then the script, you give a few rounds of notes on that. And then hopefully it gets ordered to pilot or straight to series.
Okay. So
not answer the question, but there you go.
I will pick it apart and we'll get all of it covered. Steve and Elaine, you have to have your writing samples to go out and book work, but then when you have your ideas to go into development, do you always have that pilot script ready for your idea, or do you have a broad sense of what you would want to write for a show?
I think from my perspective and what I'm continually hearing is it's just more and more difficult to actually set up a spec. I think generally speaking, people want to see something that's either coming from some level of IP or a very personal experience. I think those are the kind of ideas that sell best. And I think it's a little bit of a fool's errand to write a spec first, unless it's something that is just really, you're really just chomping at the bit to do. Because I think, I don't know exactly, maybe Cort can speak to that more, but I think there has been a trend in the last couple of years where it's just like people don't want to look at specs as much. They want to hear the nascent ideas of the pitch and then go from there. And I think maybe it's perhaps more about being able to put your fingerprints on it and developing it from the ground up. But yeah, you don't want to, I think it's a little bit of a waste of time to write a spec. It's better to get, come up with a pitch, which is sometimes weird. It feels like writing a pitch oftentimes feels like writing the novelization of a movie, kind of. It feels like it'd be almost easier to write the script. But, if you go through those steps, then you can get somebody to pay you to do the thing that, that's always nicer to get, paid for your time. But I think coming up with a pitch just first, like a very, a base level for a soft pitch, and then developing it from there, where you have all the characters and seasonal arcs and how it's connected to you and personal to you. and then take it into knuckleheads like Cort, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah, as as a newer writer, like I was always told, just keep writing, which I do think is important to do to develop my skill. But I have no illusions about whether or not that's really going to sell or even get me into a room to pitch. I've been going through my first experience with pitching and trying to sell a show right now. And what ended up happening for me was that my agent introduced me to a big TV producer. He gave me something that they already owned and wanted to develop. And so I started working on that pitch. And we've been now taking it out to various networks. But yeah, it's exactly what Steve said in terms of I'm not writing that script. We're just talking about the ideas in the pitch, and then hopefully someone will buy it, and then I'll write the script.
Yes. So why is it then, I'll direct this at you, Cort, that someone has to have a manager or an agent when they're allowed to have agents again to pitch to you?
Look, it's a few things. There is the sort of legal perspective that we have suits at Disney that don't want us to hear many unsolicited pitches because name every successful show that we've done in the last 10 years. There's been some lawsuit in which somebody claims that they also had that idea, because the reality is ideas are a bit a dime a dozen, and the execution is what really matters. And so again, from a legal perspective, we're really trying to protect ourselves, but I think more importantly it's a bandwidth issue. I mean, think about how many people are trying to break into this industry, how many people have ideas for TV shows, how many of your relatives approach you saying that they have great ideas for shows, and there aren't that many people that do what I do, and so it's just simply not possible to sort of canvas and review all of that material in a realistic way. And so we rely on our producers and agents and managers that we have good relationships with to be that first filter, to almost sort of bless a project and pass sort of the first hurdle that somebody thinks that this is a good idea. And again, it's to preserve our sanity as much as anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Steve and Elaine, how much time do you devote to coming up with different pitch ideas versus working on your own writing and your own craft? How do you divide that time?
I think it's anything that I find that anytime I'm doing like writing for myself, I feel like it is more in the this is not probably helpful for this audience, but it's more in like the feature arena, because I feel like you need a spec market in that arena. But in terms of TV, unless I just feel like it's been a long time and I just want to get something out that's a new sample, I'm just always working towards just developing an idea into a pitch. And just like first starting off like, with like a log line or like a one sheet kind of thing that just kind of gets like vomits out the idea so I can talk about it. You just quickly and articulately to like, producers and then subsequently studios, and then develop beyond that into something that's more fleshed out. Because like a pitch I myself like actually pitching, but writing a pitch is just kind of very tedious, because it's, you're writing like basically like a 25-minute monologue, and I think it's like a little bit of an antiquated thing, because you're just, for me, it's easier just to like learn, just get it in your mouth and be able to say it, but then having to write like all these colloquial things. So like everybody can kind of go through and be like, well, I don't know if this joke works. Like, it's not going to be exactly that, because there's going to be 6 people in the room and we're going to be feeding off of energy. Well, I don't know what the question was, but yes, I think I'm just mostly work on just developing the pitches. I'm not working much on just writing for myself. And if I am, it's kind of a different arena.
Okay.
And for me, one thing that I realized actually, I writing the pitch document is weird because you're really just going to say it. But at the same time, it's helped me develop my skill in terms of creating a world and creating characters. And so I have always been someone who's like, I just love to write. And a showrunner friend of mine was like, you have to think of writing as the reward for all the hard work that goes into creating that world and the characters. So, the writing is the fun part. So I now, when I write for myself, am kind of still putting together a pitch document anyway, but it is something that I could say to someone and go like, here's what's going to happen, but it's really to inform the later part of like actually writing the script. And also as a lower level writer, I don't know, I didn't know this until I got hired, that you're actually really not allowed to develop stuff, because once you get hired on a show, they want you focused on that show that you are getting paid for, so I'm not really doing a lot of pitching now that I will be working again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a thing that definitely, a lot of first year shows will kind of try to, because it's the most tenuous when they're just trying to figure out what that world is and figure out what the tone and the voice of the characters are. So they want to, oftentimes they'll lock you into no development for a year. Or if you are like in the first 2-3 years, story editor or executive story editor, you might have like a year or two freeze on that as well, because they also want you to kind of focus more on just learning the trade. And also it is, a television room is very militaristic and hierarchical in a way. So it's like, just kind of putting your time and raising up. And, additionally, like the more experience you have, the more attraction you get with pitching, and the more producers you know, and the more people that you'll know at the studio and the network side. So it just kind of helps the longer time you have. So it's, as much as that, I remember being younger and being frustrated by that, like it essentially like a fairly, there's reason for like that kind of madness to some degree.
Right. Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, Steve, that you said you actually like pitching, because I know a lot of writers who are more on the shy side. Mm-hmm. So they hate pitching. They get stage fright and nervous. So what are some of your tips and tricks to
I'm not very smart or a very good writer, but I'm like good at making jazz hands. So like that, I like when I'm actually in the room and like being able to just be a charm monster for people, but actually writing it is, I kind of said this earlier, but it does feel like I just watched The Karate Kid and now I have to write the novel of it. It feels like writing the prose form of like something that would be much easier to execute. So I think I find that tedious, but like, I don't know. For me, I grew up doing, community theater and like comedy and that kind of stuff. So I like that stuff. And for me, I think a lot of people like to read off of their shit, but to me, that feels like I'm being hamstrung a little bit. I like to just have it in my mind and have it as like a crutch if I need it. But I feel like it's good to, that you can kind of be a little bit more fluid and roll with the punches a little bit. So if you know it so intrinsically in your bones, like it's a monologue, then you can kind of move and shift a little bit easier. And it's just something you're not worried about, just telling like a longer story.
Right. Yeah. Elaine, do you find pitching nerve-wracking, or do you enjoy it as well?
The funny thing is the only official pitching I've done has been over Zoom, because I just started doing
right.
all of this, So the scariest part, honestly, is like, will my internet work? But my background is I started as an actor and I worked, for a long time, and really only got into writing because I wasn't acting as much as I wanted to, and so I also have that like performative nature that I enjoy talking to people, especially people, I think it's so fun to see someone who's like, oh, cool idea. On Zoom, it's a little bit harder because I'm like, are you into it, or are you just like looking at something past the screen? I don't know, but I enjoy the active pitching, and I think it's fun to talk to people about your ideas.
It is sort of a shame that there is a disconnect a bit between the skill of pitching and the sort of work that's actually required to get a show on the air. I guess it's my job to be able to look beyond Steve Basilone's charms and evaluate.
That's not possible.
The actual substance of, the idea. And look, it is known that, some writers are, sort of more comfortable pitchers than others, and again, you hope that the audience will be able to sort of take the ideas at sort of face value, and again remind themselves that this isn't like a contest for who's the most entertaining pitcher. It is, does this person, sort of to Steve's point, know the show inside and out? Do they know like what these characters had for breakfast? Like, is there a vision for the show? Is there a point of view? And again, if you're somebody that's uncomfortable pitching or doesn't have the same sort of theatrical background as Steve and Elaine, then read your pitch. You're obviously a good writer, and again, writing pitch pages isn't the same thing or same talent as writing a script, and nobody got into this business to write pitch pages. But by all means, just read your pitch pages, sort of verbatim. Like I'd much rather that than somebody who's it's like the waiter who's trying to be a hero to like remember your order and not write anything down. Like you don't get any points for being sort of completely off book for pitches. Like by all means, read your pitch, top to bottom if you need to.
I think that's really interesting because they are like they are such wildly different skills. Like being able to pitch a show and articulate it and then actually execute it and write it are just entirely different things. So, but it's also like, I don't know. I think it's got to be a tough skill to develop to like actually see like, okay, this is not a good or an entertaining or a magnetic pitch because that's right. Their skill set, but to look beyond that and see the idea that there's something there, that's got to be difficult skill to develop for yourself.
For sure, but it's also, I think it is important, for people to develop those sort of communication skills to get people excited about their ideas. Because think about, in success, what does that look like? You're going to be in a writer's room, sort of steering people towards your vision and getting people excited about your show. So you're going to be continuing to do a version of this, right? And sort of talking about your ideas and building support for it. And again, like, you do press for it. If your show gets on the air, like you're going to be doing things like this and, fielding questions from reporters and, so it is, I know it's terrifying, but it's helpful to practice.
I think what you said about being in the writer's room is so important because what would happen, and I didn't realize that this is how writer's room worked until I actually was in a room, that like the showrunner would often be somewhere else doing other things for the show while the room was discussing different ideas, and then come back and be like, okay, pitch me, like tell me what you guys came up with, and there was, this is not commenting on the skill of the other writers in the room, but really just the manner in which they would pitch those ideas if it was their episode, that some people would face the showrunner and talk and really tell the story. And some people would more just like face the board and read off what was written there, and I think, at least as an observer, for me, of course, I get more excited about the more like personal way of talking about it versus the looking at the board way. But again, it's, what you guys have both said too, is that hopefully you can hear the idea, but I do think presentation is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need a little P.T. Barnum in you.
A little razzle dazzle. So then, Cort, they pitch to you and you want to put their idea through development. Can you go in a little more depth about what that process looks like thereafter? How long is it?
Sure. I think I talked about the stages already a bit, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But, there's not sort of a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. It depends on the network. It depends on the platform. The broadcast cycle is very seasonal, right? And for better or for worse, you pitch your ideas in the summer and develop them, write them in the fall, hopefully get the green light to shoot a pilot in the winter, in spring. And then, all the broadcast networks at least make their decisions by mid-May so that they can present the new shows to advertisers. And again, this like is a historical process that, stems from just like when, soap producers wanted to get their product out to market. So it's definitely antiquated, and the cable streaming model is very different. And again, for better and worse, they hear pitches year round. Each platform has different cycles in terms of when they actually make pickups. I'd say the only downside to the cable streaming model is you can get stuck in what they call development hell for 2 or 3 years before you get an answer. And again, you're probably only getting paid, once for that script. So, I know that can be a very frustrating experience for writers. But, again, it's not as bad as features where you hear stories of projects being in turnaround for 5-10 years. But, again, it can be a longer process in cable.
Yeah. And then are you on board as the showrunner starts to staff up their room? Are you helping with that process? Yeah,
I mean, look, I think that, again, we try to have a light touch, at least at our studio. It's a pet peeve of mine when execs try to prescribe what a writer's room should look like, because let's be honest, we haven't spent a ton of time in them, and I think more trust generally needs to be put in showrunners to build the room that they need. But absolutely, we're reading samples, and I'd say probably for every show that I've worked on, have put some samples that I liked in front of showrunners and ultimately help people get jobs that way. But ultimately, again, it's up to the person in charge, the showrunner, to populate the room as he or she sees fit and what works best for them.
Yeah, Steve, have you noticed any particular ways about stuffing up a room, how to find writers with different qualities to make up the whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is to some degree like human nature, and to want to go with what you're familiar with and what you're comfortable with, and you want to. I think it's a fuck ton of work and a scary prospect to start a new show. It's very exciting, but it's also like it's a tremendous amount of work. So you want to know that you have at least a few people that you can count on and trust, and when you leave the room, that things are going to get done, and that you have someone to share the load with. And I think that is natural to want to do that. But then beyond that, to kind of make sure that you have a bunch of different voices in the room. So you're not going to just have, I could do something with all of my friends who are wildly talented, but like I know them very well. So it's sometimes helpful to have newer voices coming from a different perspective that didn't all go to school in Boston and move out here at the same time. People who didn't just all grow up in, white suburban neighborhoods like myself. Like it's important to have like a bunch of different voices there. But, so you want to just have like a mix of people that you're very comfortable with, but also new and exciting talent that I think that will feed off of your energy and help you kind of, bring another element to the show that you wouldn't necessarily get from the people that you're most comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. Elaine, do you have any do's or don'ts as you were on your first show as a staff writer?
I mean, I have many do's or don'ts, but I guess, where do you want me to start? About trying to get a job once being in the room?
Yeah, like one writer told me that before their first staff writing show, that the WGA taught them, okay, make sure you do this and don't do that. So did you attend that same kind of seminar or get that same lesson from the WGA?
No, because I got my job before. It's what qualified me to get into the WGA.
Right,
so
gotcha.
I've been working for months before I got into the WGA.
Right.
But I did read some articles and I talked to like everyone I knew, and everyone has different opinions, So some people had talked about like, you always want to be the person who writes on the board because then you're indispensable. Like you're the only one who can write. And some people are like, no, you never want to write on the board. That means you're not really listening. Like you want to be part of the conversation. But, so I think it depends on, on yourself. For me, I liked writing on the board. I found it helpful. People liked my handwriting. But I actually found it helpful because I had to listen to what was happening and then understand it in a way that I could then make it concise and put it on the board. So it was like this extra layer of understanding rather than just like listening and being in the conversation. I had to like really make sure I got it. And so that helped me get the story more and figure out like where we were going and what we were trying to do.
Right.
So I liked writing on the board. One other thing that I found really helpful that someone who worked on Bones told me, he became like the bone clue guy. Like he was like, I'm gonna learn about bones because this is a show about bones. So when we run out of stuff that other people know, like I'll have these random things to throw in, you know. So I became known in my room as Research Elaine. That they'd be like, oh, we need to learn about fill in the blank. I can't talk about it yet since the show hasn't come out. And I was like, okay, I'll look it up, you know. So you know, when you're a lower level writer, like you want to be helpful and you want to learn and just be a part of the team and figure out like what's going on. So
right.
Those are some things we did.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, there was, you know, for many years I worked on a show called The Goldbergs, and there's always there's a voiceover element, and a lot of it is just, you know, it's always done at the last minute because a lot of it is just to plug holes or to, you know, make up for narratively things that have been cut. So, you know, it's transitional and it's also explaining things that have been cut. And it's not fun. It's very tedious work. But there was a staff writer, you know, one of my first years there who just realized like, oh, this is something nobody else wants to do, but I can do. It's not hard. I can do this. And he was just like very happy to do that. And it was just like, as much as it was kind of thankless work, it was just like, oh, well, that's great. You found a thing that you're good at and that we rely on you for. And then, you know, it's something that did not take a ton of skill. So he could do, or it took skill, but it didn't take the ton of experience. So he could kind of fill that hole while he's also like kind of learning the lay of the land and understanding like the dynamics of the room better.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Be observant and take the lead when you can.
Yeah.
On certain tasks. Yeah. So, wow, where should I go to next? Cort, like what from development, when they're in the room writing, if they find that something with the season arc or the overall, with the season arc should change for any particular reason, is there ever a time where it goes back to you to discuss the development? Does that question make sense?
So, I think I've followed the question. I mean, look, every studio and network divvies up responsibilities differently, but, you know, I specifically work in the development department, which means that I hand off shows to the current team, typically after episode 5 or 6. And there are other, you know, networks. I know Netflix, for instance, stays with their shows. Each exec stays with their shows for the life of the show. So it's a little bit case by case. You know, certainly, look, I think that the current department are the unsung heroes of the studios, right? Because, you know, they're seeing through all 100 episodes the show, whereas, you know, I'm mostly involved in just the sort of the building of it, getting it off the ground. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the series arcs, before we get to shooting a pilot or going to series, typically, you know, the creators will put together a document for both us and the network that, you know, spells out where they see the show going. Obviously, you talk a little bit about that when you initially pitch it, but then, you know, think about it, you've now spent an additional 6 or 9 months with the show, figuring it out a little bit more. And so, yeah, before those decisions are made to green light it or not, you know, you'll typically pitch out, all right, here's the sort of key character arcs and plot points for, you know, season 1, and then, you know, you're off to the races. But yeah, obviously we know that things are going to change both once you get a room full of talented writers in the room, but also once you get into episode 4 or 5, some key plot points may shift, and you know, everybody is involved in that discussion and signs off on it.
Wonderful. So I want to turn next to how you all got here today. What was your path like? to your current positions? Elaine, do you want to start us off with your acting journey and how that led to the writing again?
Sure. So yeah, I was an actor for a while, and I booked a lot of nurses and receptionists. And while I was very grateful to have the work, it wasn't necessarily, I don't know, feeling like soul fulfilling. And so I started writing to really create work for myself. And I started producing and doing that kind of stuff. And then I realized I actually really liked writing a whole lot more than I liked acting. And I liked doing stuff for other people, not just for myself. So it started selfish, and then it like moved off of that. And so my journey was I really came through the network programs type of thing. So I heard someone speak once who was like, you know, there's already an established pipeline. Why you can try to make your own pipeline, but that's much harder. Like go through the channels. And I was like, okay, I might as well try to do that. And I hired a consultant actually when I felt ready, because I worked on my writing, like getting my writing ready. And I tried getting into programs and didn't. And then I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong. And I worked with this woman named Carol Kirshner, who really, really helped me put together like my package, and also helped me know like where my writing stood in comparison to others, and feeling ready to like make that up level move. And so I got into the HBO Writers Program, and that really changed everything. I had a manager already, and he reached out with that news to Paradigm, and they agreed to read me, and then they signed me, and that's how I started. You know, then I actually my very first interview for Gossip Girl was my first showrunner meeting, and I got it. And I was like, oh, cool. And so that's really how it started, I think.
That's amazing. I love that you found the right path that you were supposed to be on, and everything just kind of flowed and made sense from there.
Yeah, you know, it's some people like they're like, oh, your writing career is like gone so fast, like overnight success, and it's like, yeah, with 15 years of paying
right
in a different but adjacent category. Like I think I was able to be a better writer because of all the work as an actor. You know, reading a bunch of scripts and just like understanding inherently how television works, I think made a big difference to kind of leapfrogging a little bit with the writing. Right.
And as an actor, getting all of those no's constantly, taking constructive criticism about.
Yeah, I have no feelings anymore. Like, it's fine. Like, you want stuff and give me notes, like, no problem. I don't take it personally anymore.
Right. Steve, how about you?
Not entirely dissimilar. I came out here as like, you know, little dumb actor boy, and I remember just like going in for, like I did, you know, guest stars in a bunch of commercials and a bad zombie movie, and I remember just getting scripts and being like, reading them and be like, oh man, I really hope I get to be in this piece of shit. And it was just like over time of like reading like really bad scripts, being like, you know, I can at least write something this bad. It may not be great, but I can at least hit the mark that if this is the bar, I can do something that is a C- like this. And so that's kind of where it came from. Just that, and also like, I think being a little bit self-starter and not just like wanting to wait. I was never into like taking classes for acting shit. I think that was a real good metric of how far I was going to go. Because like, oh, this feels pretentious and stupid. So I wanted to be proactive without doing that. So I was just like trying to develop work for myself and friends. And so a mutual friend of Cort and I, this guy, Dan Levy, when we were like 22, we're like, let's try to write a movie. And it seemed like this insurmountable task to like write something that was like 100 pages. And then we worked on it for like, 4 months. And our first draft was like 180 pages because we were dumb idiots. But then it just became a thing that was like really gratifying. I slowly got like more and more traction with that. And to Elaine's point, it was just fun to be more on the creation side as opposed to just being like a vessel. Not to say that acting is not creating either, but like that you get to kind of create the entire world. And also like in my 20s, I spent like a lot of time being sick for a lot of my 20s. So I couldn't rely on my body, but I could always just sit on a couch and write. And just over time, I just liked it. I liked it more and more. It was more cerebral, and to the thing we talked about earlier, there's like, it satiates the other side of being in the room is like very performative at times, and pitching is very performative. And it was just like another tool in my tool belt. And I think also like coming from that performative side is also, I think, a little bit helpful with writing dialogue, because I know like a lot of people were like incredible writers in prose and in even written novels, but then you get down to script form and then their dialogue is just clunky or feels too expositional. So I think it's just there's no one way to get into it, but I find like a lot of people that I know have kind of come the route that Elaine, and to some degree I have as well, just like coming from one side and realizing that the other there's another road into working in entertainment, and one that is full of a lot of rejection and bullshit, but also feels like you're more in control in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Cort, if you don't have a performing background, what are we going to do?
Who cares about my background? No, I was except for Steve.
Yeah.
Well, this is just for him then.
I care.
Exactly. Cares. No, I was a huge comedy nerd growing up. Definitely a heavy emphasis on nerd. I once translated an episode of Seinfeld into Latin for extra credit, which I think is probably the nerdiest thing that anybody has ever done. So I was very interested in TV. In college, I was on a comedy magazine called The Lampoon, which historically has had a lot of success funneling people into sitcom writing ranks, but there sort of quickly realized that I was surrounded by much more talented friends, and rather than being a sort of a mediocre writer, maybe I could be a halfway decent, producer or executive, though I didn't even know what that meant. So yeah, I was producing shows in college, came out here. People said TV development could be a good fit. Started at CAA, which is a big agency, and I'm sure everybody knows. Death Star, did like whatever the bare minimum amount of time assisting an agent there, 9 months to get a TV assistant development gig, which was at ABC Studios, where I still am, sadly. Not sadly, but I'm old. 16 years ago, and yeah, it's been a wild ride. But yeah, just did that sort of whole apprenticeship thing, and lucked into finding a gig that I really like. Pretty early in my career.
Yeah. So a lot of time, hard work, and patience among all three of you.
Mm-hmm.
I see we have a bunch of questions coming in, so I want to make sure we get to as many of those as possible.
Good.
So what is our first question? How long on the page is that first soft pitch? How much detail do you walk in with?
For a soft pitch, I feel like if you're just pitching something, a soft pitch, you just not much. You just need to know, like, essentially. I mean, I think I've soft pitched things to producers or studio that has been like, I've kind of roughly known like the pilot story, or I've known like the hook of the show, or I've just known the world. But I think it's sometimes it just is just as simple as a log line. I think it's just whatever articulates what the show is and makes someone interested. It just needs whatever you can tell the story. And I think it's usually whenever I do something like that, it's kind of, if I were to write it down, it's like 2 or 3 paragraphs or a page. But it's not even at that level. It's just kind of organizing in my head, like how do I had this idea, and just kind of giving the elevator pitch, because the soft pitch, you don't want to put too much effort into it. Just see if people respond to like a very 1 minute kind of fleshing out a world, and if they don't, then you haven't spent 3 weeks writing something that goes nowhere.
Yes. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that?
No, I think Steve said that perfectly.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree. Thank you, Cort. I agree.
Do we have another question? What should pitches focus on more, the story idea or the writer doing the pitch? And then go over do's and don'ts in a pitch deck.
Cort.
I guess I'm just trying to understand the question. focusing on the story idea, which is obviously essential, or the writer doing the pitch. Maybe I'll answer the second part of the question, which is do's and don'ts in a pitch and pitch deck. Look, I think visuals are great. Certainly some people are tech savvier than others, and it can only get somebody more excited about a show if you can, if you have illustrations about what the world is, or again, can help somebody get into the world of your show. Do's and don'ts. I'd say don'ts. Keep it brief. 20, 25 minutes max. And look, I think that again there are great pitch pages that you could find online as a resource for those interested. I think like the Fargo pitch pages are from Noah Hawley are on there. There's a great website which maybe we could link to after that sort of illustrates some famous great pitches through the years. And again, like I like pitches that follow a certain template in terms of setting the table, opening, and then a bit of a teaser of theme, and then diving into characters, and then pilot story, and then a wrap up. And again, anywhere where you can make it feel personal, anywhere you can sort of illustrate why you're the person to tell the story, why you're passionate about it. I'd say execs and producers really respond to passion, right? Because you're going to have to live with these characters for 5 or 6 or longer years, and to be able to sort of convey that level of passion can do a great service.
Yeah, something kind of Cort said earlier about the legalese of it is like most ideas are a dime a dozen. Every story's been told, so it's primarily in the execution. So any way that you can make it feel central and personal to you, I feel like really goes a long way. Like I always, in most pitches, I always kind of like bookends with like the personal element for me. Like on the A side, like how did I come up with this idea? What facet of my life kind of bleeds into the catalyst for the story, and then kind of get into either the hook or the main protagonist, and that leads us into the other characters, and then maybe some themes, maybe an episode or two, and then wrapping it up again with why it's personal, and what are some of like just as a crib sheet for like it's part 30 Rock and it's part MASH, just like so people can kind of understand like it has the heart of this and it has the style of this. Because I think those things are very helpful in just kind of understanding, because sometimes it's hard to articulate tone, but if you get examples of it. And I personally, like, I don't think you need to do it necessarily, but I like having some sort of visual component. Like I usually do like a spotlight. That's just, I bring my computer, and if for no other reason than just to give like examples of like who you had in mind for these characters. Because, oftentimes in a pitch, you're giving like 6, anywhere between the 4 and 8 characters. And if you get more and more characters, I don't think you should do more than 8 ever. But if you're doing on the high end, it's sometimes hard to keep track in your mind. But if you give somebody a face to log on to, if it's like, oh, this character, I'm thinking Donald Glover, and this, I'm thinking, Domhnall Gleeson. I mean, that's a fun show. We should, Cort, you in?
Double thumbs up.
Yeah. But I do think, I think that those kinds of things, like anytime that you can just make it very digestible, make it very succinct, make it just, I think I like try to think of like my writing and pitching. Like you just want to make everything be smooth, make it all a smooth river stone. Anything that like causes a snag or causes a question or causes somebody to come out to have to pause either the reading or the pitch, they're doing you a disservice. You just want it to be like fully enveloping, fully engulfing, and then only afterwards do you consider about like, oh, I really like this and this and this, and I have a couple of questions. But you don't want it to be like stumbling blocks throughout. So just try to make it as linear, as smooth, and as engaging as possible.
And I'll just jump in because I didn't know how to pitch before. And what Cort mentioned in terms of the template that he likes, you can actually find that online. Just Google WB pitch template. I don't know if it originated at the WB or what, but it's been sent to me multiple times by different writers. So that can kind of lay out exactly what both Cort and Steve mentioned. And then also for my pitch that I'm doing right now, it's about 14 pages and runs approximately like 25 to 28 minutes, depending how nervous I am when I say it out loud. So just to give you a guideline of putting that pitch together.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's very helpful. That website is probably going to be overloaded in the next 5 seconds. Do we have our next question? Okay, this one is for Elaine and Steve. What were the biggest lessons you learned in your first writer's room? Can you talk about structure of a room and how does it work? So Elaine already started to talk about what she learned in her first writer's room. Steve, what did you learn in your first writer's room?
It's interesting because, you just can't, as much as you can give advice and you can have a lot of experience writing, it still can't prepare you to be in a room. I had already been working in features for 5-6 years before I had my first TV job, and had a fair amount of experience, but just being in that dynamic, as I said earlier, it is militaristic. Even if I've been doing it for a while, I was still, a baby in this world. So I think the best advice is just listen, pay attention, be nice, be a game for anything. And, especially early on, don't blow shit up. Don't be a problem. If there's something that you don't think is great, then you can say that, but make sure you have a fix for it. Make sure that you're going to pitch something like, I don't like this element because I think it fucks with the next story in this way, but what if it was like this? And then also just additionally, I remember the first show I worked on was a show called Happy Endings, and it was a lot of very young people because it was a buddy of mine's show. It was a mutual friend of Elaine and I's. This guy, Jonathan Groff, was one of the co-showrunners, and a friend of mine created the show, and he was a young kid too. And he said early on in writing the pilot, they do these punch-ups, and he'd pitch a joke, and no one would respond to it, and then so he'd pitch it again 5 minutes later, and then still no response. And then 5 minutes later, pitch it again. And then finally someone's like, yeah, we heard you, man. There's a reason why you didn't get a laugh. It's not like we didn't hear you. That was just our, it's a polite way of saying yeah, that doesn't work. So I think it's just don't repeat things. If you have a problem with something, give voice to it. And if it doesn't get any traction, that's fine. You move on. If a joke doesn't go anywhere, that's fine. Yeah. Just try to be positive, try to work a lot, listen more than you're talking. And also it's important to remember not to care more than your boss.
Right. And Elaine, could you go over the structure of a room for us?
The structure of a room. So, there could be a small room might have 4 people. We had 10-ish in the Gossip Girl room. I think it's around the same number for Dynasty. Everyone has kind of a different level. Those are things that are easily looked up online. But when you're in the room all together, I would say that the levels somewhat disappear. It's not I'm hey, you, I don't know, producer level person, we all work together. So one thing that I would mention is that staff writers are often, I think, scared to talk because they're not really sure what they should say or when to interrupt. Well, first of all, probably don't interrupt someone of a higher level, but you can contribute. And I think if you contribute in a smart way, you're of use to the room. That's what you want to be. You want to be useful. And so the ding made me lose my train of thought. Did you guys hear that?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was am I going crazy?
I think Steve forgot to mute his phone. Yeah, okay. Definitely his fault.
So
always Steve.
I was going to say that yes, contribute and move on if you're what Steve said. Move on if your idea isn't really accepted. And one thing that I learned though is that you can go, okay, it's not this, but something and that way you're saying I know my idea isn't perfect, but I'm trying to help. Maybe it's a jumping off point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's you don't have to be afraid. Just pay attention and listen, but also it is a meritocracy, even though I say it is, you race through the ranks, but it's a meritocracy. On my second show, it was a smaller room and I was still a staff writer, but was, contributing a lot and like, breaking out stories with just one other person, just because it was like, well, these guys seem like they're pretty good at their jobs. Have at it. And I think that, the cream always does rise to the top. You may not be given as much leeway as you will when you have more experience. But like, if I see somebody's talented, like, do it. Have at it.
Wonderful. Do we have another question? What's the most fun, fulfilling part about creating TV for a living?
You get to be friends
Cort.
with the class.
You get to be friends with
me potentially.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know.
That's
But you don't start off being friends with me. It has to develop over time, like most organic friendships.
No,
but
we're not friends with people who are not successful.
At the end of the tunnel, that maybe you'll be invited to a party. I don't know. Yeah. Probably that sort of champagne bubbles lifestyle, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most fun. I would say, all right, being serious, I think, working with friends. I think we all sort of got into this business, to not only, have a small part in creating television that people will respond to, but, especially as you get older, you realize so much of your day-to-day enjoyment is, who you're surrounded with and who you're working with. And, I know I make it a priority to, try to work with, people that, I like, that I'm friends with, that I want to spend a lot of time with. And, there's nothing more fun than, working on a great project with somebody who you admire or are friends with. It's about the friendship.
Yeah.
Friendship.
Nah, I don't have any friends. I've always been a TV addict, and now it really sounds like I don't have any friends, but like TV characters would like be my best friends. You know what I mean? Like I remember growing up and just being and like really feeling like these people are part of my life. Even still today, I feel that way sometimes. And so in terms of like making television, that's amazing that like someone that I made up is going to be someone else's best friend, or like things that they, turn to when they're sad or whatever. I don't know. It's the hokey answer, but it's true for me that it really feels special to like do that. I've never had a job actually before, like where I get up in the morning and I like spring out of bed and I'm like, I'm going to work. Like this has been amazing to be a TV writer.
Yeah.
I think it's a bunch of different things. I think it's the creative aspect that Elaine's talking about, and the friendship, because it is. Look, I mean, we should all be so lucky to be Adam Sandler and like make a bunch of movies that most people think are not that great, but he just keeps his friends working all the time, and oftentimes shoots. And we're going to shoot in Europe or Hawaii. That's a goddamn dream. But a lot of things I love getting to work with people that I really love, and there's the immediacy of it. Because, something that Cort said earlier, just like you can be in development hell forever on a feature, but there's a stress that comes along with it. But sometimes like I, write something on a Monday that is shot on a Tuesday that's edited the following Wednesday and that airs a week after that. So, that's exciting. It's a bit of an intoxicating thing. And, to like Elaine's point, like what we do is, it's ultimately kind of dumb, but it is magic. It's fucking magic. Like we get to like create things that like are so intimate into people's worlds that you get to care so much about. And we've all been fans for such a long time. I remember years ago, I worked on a show called Community, and there was like a conference for it that was organized by a bunch of fans, and it was a bunch of writers versus a bunch of fans for a trivia competition. And we just got fucking smoked. We didn't like stand a chance. The fans like blew us out of the water because it just, to us, it was like, well, it was something we loved. It was like part of a job, and we kind of get you lost in the weeds as to like which element of the story ended up making it to the screen. But to them, it was like something that they watched again and again and again in a way that I have with a bunch of my favorite shows. So it's just cool that you get to like leave, even if it is kind of silly, an indelible mark on culture in some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very special moment. Oh, you dinged again.
I turned it off. I don't know.
I think your MacBook is probably connected to your text messages.
Yeah, I know, but I tried to turn that shit off.
How about those people stop texting you?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
sleep mode now.
Well, with that ding, we'll go to the next question. Does it help or hurt to have producers and financiers attached to a project before pitching it? Other than festivals, what are other pathways to getting it made?
I won't touch this one because I've never sold anything. I've only ever made my own stuff, and that's it.
I mean, we're financiers at the studio, so we don't really need financiers, but we'll take somebody else's money, sure. Look, I think in terms of producers, it depends on the producer entirely. You know, there are certainly producers out there that are, you know, huge value add and are meaningful as you walk into a room. Like, you know, if Steve Basilone came in with Steven Spielberg next week, like, I would buy that project, not because of Steve Basilone, but because of fucking Steve Spielberg.
Mm-hmm,
I want to be friends with him.
Cort, I believe it's Spielberg.
Goldbergs, that's his actual Ellis Island, pronunciation. But yeah, again, you know, I think you don't want to sort of burden projects with non-essential producers who, you know, aren't going to make your life easier, right? So they should bring something to the table, whether it's, you know, a piece of IP or a relationship, help in attracting, you know, an A-list director or actor. You know, some of my favorite producers to work with are directors themselves, right? And so, you know, I've worked with Mark Webb and Ruben Fleischer, and, you know, when they bring a project in, you know, not only do you know that, you know, that it's been sort of blessed by them and they've good taste and worked on it, but they, you know, would potentially direct the pilot too, which is, you know, great from our side too, because they're great at what they do. And, you know, it is a hassle trying to find sometimes the right director for a project. So yeah, if you can elevate a package with, you know, an experienced and meaningful producer, you know, by all means do it.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's rare that I think you're going to set up anything with a studio network without some sort of producer attached. And, you know, it's behooves you more often not to have a producer that is in like the pod of whatever said studio. Like there are some people that like ABC Studios has on overall deals, those producers, and those are the people that they're most familiar with and that they know they trust and they like working with. So it, you know, kind of is helpful to have somebody that has to go, that is in that family. Sometimes it may feel like a little bit hamstringing because then you can only pitch through one studio, and some studios have more access to or better relationships with different networks, but it's always helpful to have a producer on in some capacity. It's not, you want to just make sure that it's somebody that is similarly aligned to you. Because I've definitely worked with producers before where just like, man, we're just not speaking the same language. And then that just ends up beating like your head against the wall because it's always an uphill battle to try to get any traction. For festivals, look, I'm a big fan of festivals. Like years and years and years ago, I helped start what this has become, what Catalyst has become. And I think it's for when you're very young in your career, like in taking advantage of things like Catalyst or like, you know, New York Television Festival to just make your own content and put it out there. Because again, the more proactive you can be, I mean, you just like need to knock on all the doors because you never know which door is going to open. So if you have an idea, it's while you're just waiting to get those meetings, just make something, create something, and use whatever outlet you can. If it's, you know, I think like South by and Austin and, you know, Slam Dance and Sundance all have like different television components now. So like take advantage of whatever, if it's actually making it or just writing it and then trying to get it out there. Because you never know, like maybe you will get to sit down with some agent or some producer that'll help you get to the next stage. And, you know, if the first thing doesn't work, the next thing, it'll lead to the next thing that maybe does, and the next thing that maybe does.
Yeah. So just keep it going, keep it moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear we have one more question.
Oh boy.
Just about in time. So this will be our last question.
Well, yeah, really on an upswing, guys.
Oh, okay. How do you think COVID is going to impact the TV creating process? Will studios be looking to shoot more outside of LA, New York, and Atlanta, or to try to make up for the production gap?
God, I feel like I unfortunately need to answer this question. It's a real bummer. And I think the, reality is nobody really quite knows what the long-term impact is going to be. Certainly there are much smarter people than me working on this issue, right? So there's leaders at all the big studios, leaders at all the guilds. We're trying to come up with some standards to walk that sort of tricky fine line between getting people back to work and being safe in the process. And look, sort of day by day, the sort of, the data changes, what that sort of answer looks like changes. Certainly the shows that shoot in more, sort of rural locations, might get up and running a little bit earlier. Comedies that, shoot exclusively on stages and don't have a ton of intimacy scenes are going to be easier to get up and running. We're having an interesting debate right now, as I'm sure Elaine and Steve are with their friends, just about, how much, the pandemic is going to be really reflected or acknowledged in shows and storylines moving forward. And, the problem is if you try to write to it, again, the situation is going to be different, a year or two from now, so it could read inauthentic. And I don't know, my personal view is that, people are looking to TV as an escape right now and not as just a reminder what's going on. But yeah, it's a really challenging thing that we're trying to work through.
Yeah. Yeah, it hit us all at the same time. So it's hard to expect the industry to be ahead of us in terms of solutions right away. We still need some time to figure it all out.
Yeah, I think we don't know what it's going to look like. I know, like in the kind of shows or friends that I have shows in talking about, like, to what level do you talk about it? To what level are we going to lean into and tell stories about it? And I think no one knows, because we don't know, like, is it going to be something that we're going to be wanting to relive and think about and be nostalgic about? Is it going to get darker and or is it just going to be, to Cort's point, just like, we just want escapism. Let's just go back to normal stories, because we all want to get back to normal. Is that what we're going to want to see more than anything? I think the stories that'll be interesting about this period are going to come, like, not now. Like, I do not envy Cort for the next development season where he gets fucking 17 pitches about, like, a quarantine love story. And that's awful. But I think, like, 10 years from now, I think we'll see some interesting things about this period once we have time to, like, we know how it shakes out and we are able to process it.
Right.
Yeah. And at least, like, maybe one of the good things right now for the people who are watching, I assume most of us are writers. And so, I just got a job and our room will be starting soon. So at least there's a little bit of hope for that particular section of the entertainment industry as writers, so hopefully people can get meetings and continue to staff up and stuff like that. But yeah, from everything I've heard is what they've said. Really, it's a big question mark.
Yeah. But that's a great positive note to end on, that even though everything seems up in the air right now, your career is still moving forward. So it can happen for everybody watching at home right now if they just keep working and keep at it. So
yeah.
Thank you all so much for spending this hour with me and our audience. Everyone at home, I hope you really enjoyed that and found it helpful and inspiring. So keep going, keep writing, keep creating, and stay tuned on our website to see what webinars are up next this week. Thanks, everyone.